In a shocking turn of events, legendary actor Al Pacino walked off the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live last night after the host crossed lines that left viewers stunned. What started as a standard celebrity interview spiraled into one of the most uncomfortable confrontations in late-night television history. The studio lights seemed extra bright at the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio yesterday evening. The audience buzzed with excitement as they waited for the legendary Al Pacino to walk onto the stage. At 83 years old, Pacino remains one of Hollywood's most respected figures, arriving to promote his new film, The Final Act, where he plays an aging theater director fighting to stay relevant. When Pacino walked out, the crowd erupted in a standing ovation. Wearing his signature all-black outfit with tinted glasses, he smiled and waved before taking his seat across from Kimmel. The interview started normally, with Kimmel welcoming him warmly. Al Pacino, ladies and gentlemen, one of the greatest actors of all time, Kimmel announced as the applause continued. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Jimmy. It's good to be here, Pacino replied, settling into his chair. For the first 5 minutes, everything seemed perfect. They discussed Pacino's new movie, with the actor sharing stories from the set and talking about why he connected with the character. The audience laughed at his impressions of the director and other cast members. But then, something changed in Kimmel's demeanor. His smile took on a sharper edge as he shifted topics. So, Al, I gotta ask, your new movie is about an aging director fighting to stay relevant. Is that something you relate to these days? Kimmel asked with a smirk. Pacino chuckled, not yet sensing the trap. Well, you know, all characters have elements we can connect with. Getting older in Hollywood definitely has its challenges. I bet, Kimmel continued. I mean, your last few movies haven't exactly been Godfather-level hits, have they? I think my kids use them as sleep aids. The audience's laughter became uncomfortable. Pacino's smile faded slightly, but he maintained his composure. Every actor has ups and downs, Jimmy. I'm fortunate to still be working and finding roles that interest me, Pacino responded diplomatically. Kimmel wasn't letting up. Interest you or just pay well? I heard you'll take almost any script these days as long as the check clears, the audience gasped. Pacino straightened in his chair, his eyes narrowing behind his tinted glasses. That's not accurate, Jimmy, Pacino said firmly. I've always been selective about my roles. I choose projects that speak to me artistically. Really? Kimmel pressed, leaning forward. What about Jack and Jill with Adam Sandler? What artistic merit did you see in dressing up like a Dunkin' Donuts commercial? Was that your deep artistic expression, or were you just cashing in? The studio fell silent. Even the band stopped shuffling their sheet music, everyone frozen in disbelief at Kimmel's unprovoked attack. Pacino took a deep breath. Look, Jimmy, every actor makes choices. Some films work better than others, but I stand by my work. Standing might be difficult at your age, Kimmel shot back with a snicker. I noticed you needed help getting up the stairs to the stage. Camera, operators exchanged nervous glances. The show's producer made a cutting motion across his throat from offstage, but Kimmel ignored it. Pacino's face darkened, but his voice remained steady. I think we should focus on the film I'm here to discuss. Sure, Kimmel said, pretending to check his notes. But first, I wanted to ask about those rumors that you're impossible to work with now. I heard on the set of your last movie, you couldn't remember your lines and kept everyone waiting for hours. Pacino put down the glass of water he was drinking. The studio lights reflected off his rings as he leaned forward. That's completely false information, Pacino said, his voice taking on the quiet intensity that had made him famous in films. I've maintained professional relationships with every cast and crew I've worked with for over 5 decades. That's not what my sources say, Kimmel pressed. They say you show up late, leave early, and throw tantrums worthy of a toddler. Is that the behavior of the great Al Pacino? Or is that just what happens when legends lose their touch? The audience was completely silent now. Some looked at their phones, too uncomfortable to watch what was unfolding. Others sat forward in their seats, witnessing the train wreck in real time. Pacino didn't respond immediately. He seemed to be weighing his options, the decades of experience in the spotlight helping him navigate this unexpected ambush. "Jimmy," he finally said, his voice calm but with an edge that commanded attention, "I've been in this business since before you were born. I've earned my place. I've earned respect. And I expect a certain level of professionalism when I agree to appear on shows like yours." Kimmel laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Respect has to be continually earned, Al. Just because you made good movies 40 years ago doesn't mean you get a free pass today." "No one is asking for a free pass," Pacino replied. "But there's a difference between tough questions and whatever this is." The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. Staff members were frantically signaling to Kimmel from off stage, but he seemed determined to continue his attack. "Whatever this is," Kimmel repeated mockingly, "this is called accountability, Al, something Hollywood legends like you aren't used to facing. You think everyone should just bow down because you played Michael Corleone? Times have changed." Pacino removed his tinted glasses, his intense eyes locking directly with Kimmel's. The host seemed to falter for just a moment under that legendary gaze. "Yes, times have changed," Pacino agreed. "But basic respect hasn't. Or at least it shouldn't." "Have." A wave of applause erupted from the audience, surprising Kimmel. He glanced around, suddenly aware that the crowd was not on his side in this confrontation. But instead of backing down, Kimmel doubled down. "Basic respect?" he scoffed. "Like the respect you showed when you walked out of that charity event last year? Or the respect you showed your young girlfriends half your age?" The producer was now frantically waving his arms, clearly worried about where this was heading. But Kimmel seemed beyond caring, his face flushed with a strange anger that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Pacino placed his glasses back on slowly, his movements deliberate. The studio held its collective breath, waiting for his response. Whatever was about to happen next would surely break the internet by morning. "Jimmy," Pacino said, his voice quiet yet somehow filling the entire studio, "in my 50 years in this business, I've been interviewed by the best. Carson, Letterman, Oprah, people who knew how to challenge a guest without disrespecting them." He leaned forward, his legendary intensity now fully unleashed. "But what you're doing right now isn't interviewing. It's bullying. And I won't sit here and let it happen." The audience erupted in applause, several people rising to their feet. Kimmel's face flushed red, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Oh, so the great Al Pacino can't handle a few tough questions?" Kimmel smirked. "Is that why you haven't done a real interview in years? Everyone's afraid to ask you anything real because you might storm off?" Pacino didn't take the bait. "There's a difference between tough questions and personal attacks. You're not asking about my work or my career choices. You're trying to embarrass me for ratings." "Maybe I'm just saying what everyone in Hollywood is thinking," Kimmel shot back. "That Al Pacino has been coasting on his reputation for decades. When was the last time you actually put in the work like you did for The Godfather? Now you just show up, shout a few lines, and cash the check." A woman in the front row audibly gasped. The band leader looked physically pained, staring down at his keyboard. Pacino took a sip of water, his hand steady despite the tension. "You know what's interesting, Jimmy? I came here to talk about a film I poured my heart into for the past year. A film about dignity in aging and finding purpose in your later years. And instead of discussing that, you've decided to make this about tearing down my legacy." "Legacy?" Kimmel laughed. "Is that what we're calling it now? Because from where I'm sitting, your legacy is becoming the punchline to jokes about actors who don't know when to retire." The producer was now standing just off camera, making frantic cutting motions, but Kimmel ignored him completely. Pacino nodded slowly as if coming to a decision. "You know what, Jimmy? Let's talk about knowing when to stop. Because right now, You're demonstrating exactly why some people shouldn't have platforms like this." The audience erupted in cheers, and applause again. Someone shouted, "Tell him, Al." Kimmel's face darkened. "Careful, Al. Remember whose show you're on." "Oh, I'm very aware," Pacino replied. "And I'm also aware that millions of people will see this exchange. They'll see a host who chose to ambush a guest rather than have a meaningful conversation. Maybe they'll see a washed-up actor who can't handle the truth," Kimmel snapped back. Pacino actually laughed at this, a genuine laugh that reminded everyone watching of the charisma that had made him a star. "The truth? Jimmy, you wouldn't recognize the truth if it sat in your guest chair." He gestured to the set around them. "The truth is, this kind of gotcha entertainment is exactly what's wrong with television today. You're not interested in real conversation. You just want clips that will go viral." "Don't lecture me about entertainment, Al," Kimmel said, his voice rising. "Your last 3 movies combined made less than my annual salary. Maybe instead of criticizing my show, you should focus on not boring audiences to death." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Pacino's expression shifted subtly, and even Kimmel seemed to realize he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "My worth isn't measured by box office numbers," Pacino said quietly. "And if yours is measured by how cruelly you can treat your guests, then I pity you." Kimmel tried to regain control of the situation. "Look, Al, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here." "No, Jimmy," Pacino interrupted. "We didn't get off on the wrong foot. You deliberately chose this path for our conversation, and now you're seeing that it's not going how you planned." Kimmel glanced off stage, clearly looking for help from his producers, but found none. The producer was now on the phone, likely dealing with panicked network executives watching the disaster unfold in real time. "Let me tell you something about longevity in this business," Pacino continued, his voice taking on the cadence that had captivated movie audiences for generations. "It's not just about talent, it's about respect. Respect for your craft, respect for your colleagues, and respect for your audience." He gestured toward the studio audience. "These people didn't come here to watch you try to humiliate me. They came to be entertained, to hear stories, to share an experience." Several audience members nodded, some even calling out words of support. "So now you're the expert on my audience?" Kimmel tried to joke, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," Pacino replied. "But I know something about connecting with people. I've spent my life doing it through characters that mean something to them. What are you doing, Jimmy? Really, what's the purpose of an interview like this?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Kimmel seemed genuinely lost for words. The facade cracked briefly, revealing something like embarrassment underneath. "We're just trying to keep things interesting," Kimmel finally said, his tone less aggressive. "People don't want the same boring promotional interviews." "There's a wide space between boring and disrespectful," Pacino countered. "Great interviewers find that space. They challenge their guests while honoring their humanity." The audience applauded again, longer this time. Kimmel's expression hardened once more as he realized he was losing the room entirely. "All right, enough with the lecture," he snapped. "You want to talk about your movie? Fine. Is it true you needed cue cards for every scene because you couldn't remember your lines?" A collective groan rose from the audience. Pacino shook his head, a sad smile playing at his lips. "And there it is again," he said. "You just can't help yourself, can you?" He began to remove his microphone, his movements unhurried but deliberate. "What are you doing?" Kimmel asked, panic finally entering his voice as he realized what was happening. "Something I should have done 10 minutes ago," Pacino replied, standing up from his chair. "I'm choosing to end this conversation." The studio erupted in chaos. The audience was on their feet, some cheering, others simply watching in disbelief. The band scrambled, unsure whether to play or remain silent. Camera operators looked to each other for guidance, as Pacino's microphone dropped to the chair with a thud that echoed through the sound system. "You can't just walk off," Kimmel said, rising to his feet. "We're in the middle of a show." Pacino turned to face him, now standing at his full height. Despite being shorter than Kimmel, he somehow seemed to tower over the host in that moment. "Yes, we're in the middle of a show," Pacino said, his voice calm yet powerful. "A show where you chose to ambush me instead of having a meaningful conversation. That was your choice, Jimmy. This is mine." The audience erupted in applause, many now standing and cheering for Pacino. Kimmel looked around frantically, his face flushed with embarrassment as he realized he'd lost control, not just of his guest, but of his entire audience. "Wait, Al, hold on," Kimmel said, his tone suddenly shifting to apologetic. "Let's take a breath here. Maybe I pushed too hard. We can reset." Pacino paused, studying Kimmel's face. For a brief moment, the audience wondered if he might reconsider. "You know what the difference is between acting and real life, Jimmy?" Pacino asked. "In acting, we get multiple takes to get it right. In real life, you only get one, and you just wasted yours." With that, Pacino turned and began walking toward the stage exit. The studio fell into stunned silence, broken only by the sound of his footsteps. Kimmel, desperate to salvage something from the disaster, called after him. "So that's it? The great Al Pacino runs away when things get tough? What happened to the guy who played Michael Corleone?" Pacino stopped. The entire studio held its breath. Slowly he turned back toward Kimmel. "Michael Corleone was a character who lost his soul," Pacino said. "I'd rather keep mine." He gestured around the studio. "All these people here, all those watching at home, they deserve better than this. And frankly, so do I." A woman in the front row started clapping, then another, and suddenly the entire audience was on their feet, applauding not for the show, but for Pacino's dignity in the face of disrespect. Kimmel stood frozen behind his desk, the sound of applause washing over him like a wave of judgment. In that moment, it was clear to everyone watching who had won this unexpected showdown. The show's producer finally rushed onto the stage, whispering frantically in Kimmel's ear. Kimmel nodded stiffly, then addressed the cameras. "We'll be right back after this break," he said, his voice tight. As soon as the on-air light went off, chaos erupted. Staff members rushed around, some heading toward Pacino, who was now almost at the exit, others surrounding Kimmel, who had slumped into his chair. "Mr. Pacino, please," the producer called, hurrying after him. "We sincerely apologize. This isn't what we had planned." Pacino stopped at the exit door, turning to face the producer. "Then you should have stopped it," he said simply. In the background, Kimmel could be heard arguing with other producers. "What do you mean it was inappropriate? It was supposed to be edgy. That's what we do." "Not like this," a female producer shot back, not caring who heard. "This was just cruel, Jimmy." "And for what? Clicks?" Audience members had their phones out, recording everything despite the staff's attempts to prevent it. Within minutes, clips would start appearing on social media. By morning, the entire exchange would be trending worldwide. Pacino paused at the exit, looking back at the chaos he was leaving behind. For a brief moment, there was something like sadness in his expression. Not for himself, but for what entertainment had become. A young production assistant approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Pacino, your car is waiting outside. Is there anything you need?" Pacino smiled at the young man, a genuine, warm smile that contrasted sharply with the tension still filling the studio. "I'm fine, thank you. Some things are more important than publicity." With a final nod to the audience, many of whom were still standing and applauding, Pacino pushed through the exit door and disappeared from view. Back on the set, Kimmel was being handed a glass of water by a concerned staff member. His hands were shaking slightly as he drank. "We're back on in 30 seconds, the floor director announced. "What am I supposed to say?" Kimmel asked, looking around wildly. "We don't have a guest." "You'll apologize," the executive producer said firmly. "Sincerely. Then we'll go to commercial and end the show early." "Apologize? For asking tough questions?" Kimmel protested. The executive producer leaned in close. "Those weren't tough questions, Jimmy. That was a hatchet job. And it backfired. Spectacularly. Now do damage control before this gets any worse." The on-air light blinked on, and Kimmel found himself facing a studio audience that was no longer on his side. Their expressions ranged from disappointment to outright hostility. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice hoarse, "I want to apologize for what happened earlier. Things got out of hand, and for that I'm truly sorry." The apology sounded hollow even to his own ears. A few audience members shook their heads in disbelief. "We'll be ending our show early tonight," Kimmel continued. "Thank you for joining us, and again, my apologies to Mr. Pacino and to all of you." As the credits began to roll, people started filing out of the studio, many talking animatedly about what they'd witnessed. Outside, a crowd had already gathered near the backstage exit, hoping to catch a glimpse of Pacino. When he emerged, there were cheers and supportive calls. Someone shouted, "You showed him, Al!" Pacino simply raised a hand in acknowledgement before sliding into his waiting car. Inside, his longtime assistant waited. "That was something else," she said. "Are you okay?" Pacino removed his tinted glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I'm fine. Some things matter more than publicity." "The film promotion," she began. "The film will speak for itself," Pacino interrupted gently. "Always has, always will." As the car pulled away from the studio, Pacino's phone began buzzing incessantly with calls and messages. News of what had happened was already spreading, like wildfire. "Do you want to respond to any of these?" his assistant asked, holding up the phone. Pacino shook his head. "No need. What happened in there speaks for itself." Back in the studio, Kimmel sat alone in his dressing room scrolling through his own phone with growing dread. Social media was exploding with clips of the interview, most accompanied by scathing comments about his behavior. Network executives had already called twice. A knock came at his door. "What?" he called irritably. His producer entered, face grim. "We need to talk about tomorrow's show and the public statement the network wants you to make." "It was just an interview," Kimmel protested weakly. "No, Jimmy," the producer replied. "It was a mistake, one that's going viral as we speak." "Pacino deserves respect" is already trending. Outside in the real world, the incident was indeed taking on a life of its own. Clips of Pacino's dignified responses were being shared millions of times. Other celebrities were weighing in, most siding firmly with Pacino. Several scheduled guests for upcoming shows were calling to cancel their appearances. In his hotel room, Pacino finally switched off his phone and looked out at the city lights. Despite everything, he felt a strange sense of peace. In an industry that often valued spectacle over substance, he had stood his ground. The next morning, as the sun rose over Los Angeles, the story dominated entertainment news. Commentators debated the exchange, but the public verdict was clear. Pacino had shown what true star power meant. Not just fame or box office success, but dignity, integrity, and self-respect. As for Kimmel, he would eventually issue a more formal apology, one crafted carefully by network publicists. But the damage was done. In an age where authenticity was currency, he had shown himself to be bankrupt. And Al Pacino? His film opened the following weekend to record numbers. Audiences drawn in part by curiosity after the infamous interview, but staying for the powerful performance that reminded everyone why he was, and always would be, a legend. Not just for his acting, but for his character when the cameras weren't rolling.